Hello, I'm Steve Hedlund, Communications and Events Manager at the Global Aquaculture Alliance. So GAA announced recently that it's relaunching its signature goal conference, featuring a hybrid experience with a series of virtual events leading up to an in-person event in Seattle. This approach builds upon the virtual event that GAA organized last October, featuring 10 sessions and 15 hours of content over the course of 4 days. One of those 10 sessions was chaired by our very own Dr. Steve Hart, Vice President of Market Development for Asia, Oceania, and Europe for GAA's Best Aquaculture Practices Certification Program. The session was titled Predicting the Unpredictable: Seafood Trading, Marketing, and Consumption in a COVID-19 World. The session focused on Asia and Australia, and speakers included representatives of JD.com, Mitsui, Woolworths, Australia, and New Zealand Salmon Company. So Steve, I'd like to kick things off by asking you, what were the main takeaways from your Goal 2020 session?
Thanks, Steve. And this is really interesting, going back and getting to review all of these again and listen and think about where we are now compared to where we were when we recorded those. And my first takeaway was really around the impacts that COVID-19 had on the markets and how they reacted to that. And specifically looking at Feng Yu and how from JD.com and how he discussed what was going on in China. It was really kind of around the peak of all the news about the increased testing and looking for the presence of traces of COVID-19 on packaging and on seafood. So there was a lot going on in China at the time, and a lot of increased restrictions on imports. And really what this led to was a lot of a push for increased traceability. And it also really kind of flipped the market in China. But previously, imports were kind of seen as the premium product. And what this did was it put more of a focus on domestic product, and domestic product kind of took that premium stage. And some of those companies now that are importing to China really have to focus on maybe rebuilding some brand equity. Second takeaway was really a cool one for me, and that was from Gemma from New Zealand King Salmon. She talked about how they had lost so much of their business because of their product is really suited very well for restaurant trade. And with COVID shutting down so many restaurants around the world, they had to switch to retail. So she talked about some of their strategies and how they're going to get into retail. And now, several months later, we're looking at this, and I can go to my local grocery store and find their products on shelf, and I never was able to before. So for me, it was just really cool to see her actions put to words. I really appreciate that, and see how a leading producer like that can make those changes and adapt to the pandemic.
Yeah, interesting. So Steve, as I mentioned in the introduction, we're trying to build upon what we discussed last year, and certainly a lot has transpired in the last few months. What one takeaway from your Goal 2020 session warrants further discussion? Later this year, you're chairing a Goal 2021 session. So what one issue would you focus on in 2021 that perhaps in retrospect didn't get as much consideration as it should have in 2020?
Yeah, we talked a lot about innovation in the supply chains and how they were adapting to the situation. And I think what I would really like to focus on is innovation in the marketplace. And that's going to continue to be critical moving forward. We heard Tommy from Mitsui talk a lot about innovations all through the supply chain, basically from the hatchery all the way to the end market. And there's going to be increased need for all of these type of innovations. And I'm sure other sessions and Goal will focus on innovations at the production level. But I think one that gets overlooked a lot is that innovation at the market level. What's the consumer seeing? What's the consumer looking for? And I think I really would like to focus on what were the seafood success stories that came out of the pandemic that were really kind of market driven and consumer driven. So that's, I think, where I'm going to focus my session.
Okay. And finally, you had a pretty distinguished panel of speakers, and I felt like they spoke pretty openly about the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead. And you singled out one series of comments here that resonated with not only yourself, but with our audience. Can you please cue it up? What are we about to watch?
Yeah, so the clip I'm going to share will be both Feng Yu from JD, and then Bill Wall from Woolworths Australia, talking a little bit about some needed changes and how they could adapt to the pandemic. But I think it's got broader application. That's really what I want to talk about. First, Feng Yu talked a lot about the traceability side and how we need to see improvements in traceability, and consumers want to know where their product's coming from. So he's going to make some comments about that and how producers need better control over the entire supply chain. And then Bill will make some really interesting comments, not only about things like that, but really around what are the consumers looking for? And it's about ease of preparation. It's about using less plastics in packaging. It's about minimal packaging. It just kind of highlights and features the product. So I think while the comments are coming from China and Australia, what we've seen over the last year is these have much broader application now. We're hearing these same trends all around the world. And this whole local thing is really picking up. And I'll just use China as an example. Just recently, we've heard reports that domestic shrimp in China are selling for almost twice the price as imported shrimp. So as I said earlier, it's just a complete flip from where we were before. But there's a lot more going on here than just the pandemic driving this. Retail is kind of changing around the world, and we're gonna need those innovations in the marketplace. And I'm gonna use one specific example here. That's a marketing communications innovation. My other hat I wear is I'm on the board of directors for the Seafood Nutrition Partnership. And when the pandemic first hit, we did a complete switch on our programming and started the hashtag Eat Seafood America campaign. And this was really a campaign that was focused at consumer messaging and trying to get consumers not only to eat more seafood, but also to eat seafood at home as a way to support the industry during what was obviously going to be very tough times. And since the pandemic started and this campaign kicked off, it's had over 1 billion online impressions. And survey results that we've conducted have shown that viewers of the campaign are 3 to 4 times more likely to eat seafood more often, and 3 times more likely to eat seafood at least twice a week, as is recommended by health professionals. And this is as a result of viewing the campaign. So I think what the session will need to really talk about is not only that marketing message, but what other type of product physical innovations are needed. The consumer is looking for seafood. Now it's really going to be up to us to deliver it.
All right. Well, thank you, Steve. Let's play the clip.
Sounds good. Thanks. I think a lot of our viewers are really interested in accessing the Chinese market. I see a lot of opportunity in China, but obviously COVID-19 has provided a lot of disruptions to that access. And Feng Yu, I was just hoping that you could give us a little bit of advice to producers around the world on what they should be thinking about as they want to access the Chinese market during these times.
The epidemic definitely pushed the China government and the seafood industry to pay more attention to the food safety and management of imported seafood. Without any doubts, it's very important to control the whole process of seafood processing, transportation, and storage. And besides that, I would say COVID-19 testing for product and the package is quite critical for any seafood exported to China. The nucleic acid testing report is compulsory in retail, wholesale, and food service channel. It's just almost like gate pass in China during this special period. So what I would recommend is our supplier and those who exported to China should pay close attention to the latest policy inspection and to avoid any potential rejection and losses. That's what I suggest.
So, Bill, kind of the same question for you, but from your perspective in Australia, especially we've seen a big shift towards retail because of food service being shut down because of COVID-19. What advice would you give to producers who want to access the markets in Australia?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. So I guess it bears mentioning from a commercial perspective, freshness, price, quality, country of origin is still extremely important in Australia. In Australia as well, locally sourced, so Australian produced is important. A sales driver that seems to have increased since COVID has hit is take into account the ease of preparation. So in terms of time to prepare and messiness, so convenience in other words, but convenience that doesn't negatively impact the drivers I mentioned previously, or also introduce any new issues like unnecessary packaging, for example. In the Australian supermarket space, there's a relatively small number of players, so everyone's sustainability policies they're not wildly different from each other. Therefore, what I think helps someone in sort of my position in the sustainability team or a buyer's position is producers or suppliers who are coming to the table with the detail ready to show us. So certification type, expiration dates, any future certification plans, that kind of thing. They're no longer nice to have. So having that information, if you don't have that information straight up, that can actually delay the vetting process overall. I think it also pays to understand the broader sustainability goals of your prospective customer. So the seafood raw material may be certified, which is fantastic, but is the packaging recyclable? Is there anything about your product that helps to avoid food waste? If your product ticks a few boxes, that can sort of help you stand out in a crowd.